Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to this moment in time. Great, thankful Thursday. Glad to have you all on. I want to introduce a gentleman who is here and going to talk to you and regale us about his upcoming book and the chapters of his book, Awakened by the Ants. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to present to you Mr. Vastim East.
Thank you, Grace. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time out just to listen to me talk about Awakened by the Ants. This will be chapter 3. Last week, we discussed the amazing invitation, drowning in doubt, and today we will go through briefly a few words about that's happening in chapter 3, which the title of this particular chapter is The Bull and the Cobra. The Bull and the Cobra. As we talked about in chapters 1 and 2, I talked about an invitation to travel to Tanzania. It was unexpectedly. I traveled with a dental group to Tanzania. And of course, I have no knowledge of the dentistry other than going to lay in one of their chairs and take their funny gases. That's my only experience with the dentistry. And it was a mystery, even to this day, why I was chosen to travel to Tanzania. And I discussed in chapter 1 how I received this invitation following a book that I published, My Sight Man, an illustrated children's book that was on display at the Jadis Center in New York City in June of 2018. And my mind has only given me some clue as someone perhaps was there at the book fair and saw the book, who was acquainted with the Nanda Journey, which is the travel agency that the group that I went with. Perhaps someone there saw the book and said, maybe this is a candidate for he to take himself to Tanzania with the story that he wrote, because the story is based in Tanzania about the Maasai tribe. So that is my only connection, I think, that could have possibly happened. But leaving that aside, it was undoubtedly a great invitation, and I'm happy that I accepted the invitation, having traveled to Africa 4 times before, but never this way. I went purely, the first 4 times, purely for a learning experience, enjoyment, but this time, this one particular package had everything and I didn't really understand it. And chapter 2 was about drowning in doubt. We talked about in chapters 2, how when we're about to embark on something that perhaps we didn't plan or think about, we have the little gremlins that sit on our shoulders, the left and right, that oftentimes are voices that give you all the reasons why you should not do something. And this is for anyone, to inspire anyone that have an opportunity in front of them to avail themselves of it, to take advantage of it. And don't worry so much about the detail. I got caught up in the detail. As I pointed out in chapter 2, I had recently stopped working a little bit, about 15 months before. So it wasn't an economic matter that had me boggled down in doubt as to whether I should take this trip. But there were things going on in my life that were more personal, that I felt that were not in alignment with this particular trip. But after dealing with it for several days and weeks, that haunted me, and I mentally found all the reasons why I should not take this trip. The trip was to have been, it was in November of that year, 2018. And finally, after wrestling with it, I decided I would take it. So today, we are talking about chapter 3. And in putting this book together and thinking about it, I had no idea that I would ever write this particular book. turning fiction into nonfiction. And what gave me the idea for this book was after joining the ATS last year, because I love fiction, but I had no idea that I would come to love nonfiction. But in the process of listening to members of the ATS who had already achieved levels of their resume in this business, they'd already presented to the world their works of nonfiction when they would go out and speak. And I could not come to, but I came to understand after not being able to justify writing a book. I realized then, after listening to people such as Law, after meeting him, I realized then that, and listening to other people in the business, one is Steve Sebo that I met sometime before. He's very instrumental out of Atlanta, Georgia. And he talked about the need for nonfiction. You know, if you're going to help people, the how-to books and books that answer the questions about human development, our lives. And I felt that I could turn this little book that was meant for peer entertainment and education to young children. And I realized that this book could be a catalyst for me to inspire people. The mystery of it is to not only tell your story, but tell stories that you've told. Tell stories that are meaningful to you. And I had no idea until weeks after returning from Tanzania that because of the way this book was structured, my side man, the struggles that this little boy went through in order to achieve the status of manhood in his culture, his tribe. This book of mine, now Awakened by the Ants, is this old boy who utilized nature, the outdoors, things that frightened him, that startled him, that puzzled him. And that's what goes before the people, I believe, as a great source of help and inspiration. Those who have been on the battlefield, as so to speak. Those who have wrestled with their own inner demons, that's me. Those who have found themselves alone, that was me. So chapter 3, I'm going in reverse in a sense. My first introduction, my first visit to Africa began in Spain, of all places. It began in Spain because I always wanted to see the land of the Moors, where the Moors had gone into Southern Europe. And my first day in arriving in Malaga, Spain, I could look across from Spain, the Spanish shoreline, and I could see the coast of Africa in the distance. It was a wonderful trip to Spain. I went there in the year of 2001. And it was watching the coast of Spain that I would walk along the seashore, and I imagined what it was like when these young Africans and Arabs, when they landed in the 7th century, 700 AD, 750 AD, at that time frame. I wondered what was it like for them to cross over the Mediterranean and then be told by the general that led them across in this first invasion, there their boats were burned. They could not return to Africa. They were told, before you is the enemy and behind you is the sea. So this is where I was in developing this chapter. It comes a time in our lives when we make a decision. We must come to terms and realize that sometimes it's good to burn bridges. Sometimes you don't need a way to retreat or to go back. And sometimes we need to burn the bridges in our mind. That's what this chapter is focused on. And I use the title, The Bull and the Cobra. While there in Malaga, Spain, before I would make that short boat ride from that part of the Rock of Gibraltar, which is actually Great Britain. It's amazing. You ride from Spain into Great Britain. And I didn't know this until I got there. But before I went to a bullfight on the Sunday before I went, taking this boat ride. Watched the bullfight. I watched the majesty of the bulls when they came out of their chute. I'd seen bullfights in motion pictures, magazines, but until I saw it in real life, I realized that this is a dance. This is some kind of ritual. During the bullfight, there's a woman sitting in beautiful array. It's like an orchestra. And I use this imagery in this chapter to show the beauty that when we are in struggle, when we're in the fight, it is virtually a symphony that there are powers that be, there are powers all around us that are orchestrating this fight. She drops a handkerchief and things take place. She stands, things take place. She's always there watching the fight. And this is the beauty that I learned from watching the bull and the matador both come into the arena rested and powerful. But the percentage of the bull winning are very small. There are matadors that do die in the fight. And that afternoon, I witnessed one bull after the next. There were 3 bullfights. And each time, the bull lost. Each time, at the defeat of the bull, the matadors were paraded around the arena, and the poor bull was dragged away by mules with his head, tongue hanging out. And this is where I was in preparing, as I think about that trip to Tanzania. I was both the bull and the matador. This was my time in my arena, and I didn't realize it until I saw it in retrospect, that the beauty of tackling the enemy within yourself. I was both the bull and the matador. Well, days went by, and eventually I would take the boat ride to the coast of Morocco, and when the boat arrived from that short ride, it was a beautiful ride going over. And I got down and I actually knelt and I kissed the concrete at the dock. This was my first time setting foot on African soil. And standing up, I heard a voice, apparently because of my physical and the expression on my face, there was a voice that said, "Welcome home, my brother." And I stood up, and there stood this tall, as dark as night, Moroccan man, extended his hand down to me, and he helped me to my feet. And it was such an overwhelming, such a moving moment in my life. And I began to understand now as I look at this book, I was welcomed home. I had to go all around the world in a sense. I would have to go through many struggles and many dark moments in my life to come to understand that there is a welcoming for all of us, for each and every individual, if you follow your heart, follow your dream. But how does the bull play a part in this? As I said earlier, we're all young and strong at some point in our lives. We are all adventurous at one point in our lives. And even if we lose in the battle, as I saw all 3 of the young bulls die, put up your best fight. And that's what this chapter is focused on. Now, how does the Cobra come into play? It was walking around the city of Tangiers that day. that I approached and found myself in the midst of Cobra charmers, men who were playing with cobras in an alleyway. And it was at that moment I looked, and I've always had a fear of snakes, a respectful fear of snakes. But it was not until one of the Moroccans came up to me while I was standing there in the crowd watching these cobras. Their heads were flattened, they were hissing, they were sucking in air, and I wanted to step backwards into the crowd. And one of them came to me and he put a cobra around my neck. And he stuck the cobra, much of his body, into my shirt. And I could feel the tail of the cobra as it was moving around my chest. And later he was wrapped around my neck. And I think about, as I put into this chapter, once the cobra's face was put next to mine, and I could see its beady eyes staring at me, he began to hiss, the snake, the cobra. No longer was I that young matador across the Mediterranean in Spain. I was in Africa now, looking at a cobra in the eye. This chapter is to inspire those who, you may be in the battle fighting your bulls. And once the bulls are done, you may be involved with dealing with the cobras in your life, the mysteries. Maybe you've gone somewhere else to find your cobra. Maybe you've had to land on a different shore of thinking and reality to know your cobra and your bulls. But I walked away from, people were photographing me. I have photos myself of that incident, that moment with the cobra. And I hold it dear to my heart now because it was preparing me, and I didn't know it, for this trip to Tanzania. I had no idea that they would somehow become the mystery. All the mystery that surround our lives is uniquely woven by something we cannot understand. The bull and the cobra. And it talks about in this chapter the significance of facing your cobras. This chapter points out when we face our cobras, our bulls in our lives, we walk away a stronger people. We walk away a wiser people. But the most important thing is we walk away a more gracious people, a more gracious person, a more giving person. Because as this chapter, as it concludes, it's not about the fight. It's not about the opposition. It's not even about victory or loss. It's about simply doing it. Just doing it. Just falling in line with it. That fight your bulls and accept your cobras, because their greatness comes about. The cobra, the bull, and the cobra. So if there are any questions about these two aspects of my journey as I went backwards in order to come forward, as I stepped backwards into my life, because I could not project into the future when I was trying to write this book, but I used my experiences and the fears and the learning experiences from my fears to produce this book, Awakened by the Ants. Are there any questions or thoughts, or throw some darts and arrows at it? Go right ahead. The floor is open.
Mr. Bassett, I have a question.
Yes.
What was going through your mind when the guy put the cobra in your shirt? That is what I would have done.
It was extremely, it was exhilarating. It was, yeah, I was fearful at first. And some people think that the cobras are not venomous, that their venom has been removed, but I was assured, I was standing there, I was assured by one of the snake handlers that the snakes are poison. But what was going on through my head initially was I was exhilarated, and I was thinking about people back home would see a photo of me with the snake. but it's so surreal. It was so, I encountered snakes back here in Houston, water moccasins, copperheads, but they were always on the losing end with a stick or a rock. Very brutal on snakes here. Having had a buddy of mine who was bitten by a copperhead once, and even then, I didn't think about water at that time. It was fun, Grace. It was absolutely fun. Uh, I received energy from the people who were laughing and cheering and clapping. It was fun, but I had chills once it was over thinking about it. There were moments when I thought about it. What if the handler had dropped the snake or had released it? Because it's a pretty powerful snake. It's extremely powerful. But just knowing that I did it now, and I look back and awakened by the ants, how we encounter many obstacles on this course of life, and how it all seems to come together, never as a finished piece, but simply as a continuum that takes us to wherever we're headed, to eternity. But that's the best way I can answer that right now. That it was exhilarating. It really was fun, and I understand why people jump from airplanes. I understand now how people mountain climb, how people take risk, and the ants awakened me to that in order to put this book together. Because if I had never encountered these things, and what if I'd gone to Tanzania never having experienced some of these things, I would have, perhaps something would have replaced it as a story. But this was real. This was my beginning of telling my story as transparently as I can to help young children that are living in fear of being bullied, someone who is having issues on a crazy job, a crazy marriage, a crazy community. Because the world is still full of bullies. But I thank God that I was able to see the bullfight. It wasn't my fight, but I put myself mentally where these matadors stood. And I learned from it that there's a symphony that surrounds our lives. There is both good and evil that watches it. But that's what the Cobra. It was the evil that I had to deal with, and yet it was beautiful. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vastim, this is Pam. I'm just riveted to the story. I'm particularly riveted to the fact, as you describe it, it's like on your journey back to the homeland, that the universe gives you the awakening. It's when, as we return to the homeland, if so many people I know who have returned to the motherland have all described experiences in their own way similar to yours, that there's sort of a removal of a film over the eyes. There's a seeing, there's a knowing, an ancient knowing that gets rekindled. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about your experience there and how you were greeted when you kissed the ground and being welcomed home, and that all these experiences you've had on the way that home and once you came home that were just so life altering. But I can't wait for the rest of the chapters. It's like,
oh, thank you.
I am on pins and needles hearing this. And it's interesting as you talk about the Maasai. I haven't had an aunt who was adopted into our family when she was little, and she didn't know where her background was. The records for African American children were never well kept, and she didn't know. And she went when she was in her 90s. She lived to her 100th birthday, and when she was in her 90s, she was telling me the story of when she returned to Africa, and she got there, and a Maasai saw her, and she was very tall, very stately woman, and came and ran his fingers all over her face and just touched her and said the same thing. Said, "You Maasai." And he knew by her bone structure that she had been from the tribe. And she was sharing with me so much that she learned about herself and her people from this shaman from the Maasai tribe, who was explaining to her how they can tell where we're from. And they can tell a lot of us from our bone structure. So when you talk about Maasai, I became very excited about that.
Thank you. It's I just feel that at this stage in my life, I know this now. I've come to you say, get wisdom, get knowledge, but above all, get understanding. I believe understanding is superior to knowledge. It's absolutely superior. The first time I was given a book, I was around 17 years old. It was by Lerone Bennett, I think his name. He made the first real collection of African history books. It was only a 3-volume set of, but it was invaluable. And the first time I ever opened the books up, I turned to a page and I saw this beautiful man sitting in a convertible, a 4-door convertible. And he was wearing one of these emperor hats. I'd never seen a picture of this man before. It was Marcus Garvey. And when I saw that picture, I looked at him and he had the facial features of my mother's oldest brother. So I had a sense of, I could connect with him. This was Marcus Garvey. And I fell in love with his story. I fell in love with his mission in life. And I truly believe that if his dream had not been sidelined by the powers that be at that time, people that I had come to respect from the academia, such as Du Bois, how the system used him, how the system used Du Bois to destroy Marcus Garvey. Marcus had a dream. He had a dream that would be not the answer to the plight of African Americans or Africans in the Caribbean and South America, and even Africans who had settled in Mexico. But it was a vision that he had that if we wanted to have that sense of earthly respect, you must have real estate that is yours. You must have somewhere, when you bury your dead, it is a sense of place and purpose. Well, Marcus Garvey never set foot in Africa. He was made to be, he was assigned the image of being an idiot, a non-businessman. He died in London. He never set foot in Africa. And I had the fortune to do a speech once about Marcus Garvey some years later. And I was told afterwards by one of the gentlemen who watched that speech, and he said, the speech you've given, you haven't really given it yet, but you must give Marcus Garvey's speech again. Because I believe the plight that our people are suffering from today is that we don't know who we are. And I'm awakened by the ants to help carry that message. And it's not only for people of color, African people, it's for everyone. Because the funny thing, the first time I ever went to New York City, the LaGuardia Airport, it's the funny thing that when I saw, when I heard the international flights, I saw tons of people that didn't look like me that were en route to Ethiopia, that were en route to Nigeria, Namibia. People that looked like me were headed strictly to Europe. Our passports were being stamped to go everywhere but Africa. And I believe that I hope this book will not only it awaken me, the ants, I hope that it awakens, because I believe that's where a sense of true fellowship between men will begin, when we have a sense of purpose and real estate. Not that we can call home, because the continent is home to all mankind. but we must come to terms and fall in love with ourselves. And this is what we talk about a lot here at the ATS is you got to love yourself. And the prison systems are filled with our young men and women as a result that they don't see the uniqueness of themselves, that you've dealt with things that put you there that were not nice, but learn to deal with your own inner cobras and the bulls. That there are strings that are being pulled. And not to go so far into the social and the political aspects of it, but that's what this chapter is about. As I look back, as I was walking forward into the future with this story, the bulls and the cobra. Are there any other thoughts or questions someone would like to fire at me? I welcome it.
Go ahead, Charmant.
Okay. Hello, Vastim. This is
Hello,
Sharmon.
Sharmon. Yes, Sharmon.
I wanted to know, after you experienced the Cobra in your shirt, is there any other challenges that you had the courage to face, similar to having a Cobra placed into your shirt?
Yes, I can tell you this. When we returned back on the boat ride back to Spain to head to the Rock of Gibraltar, the captain on this boat, it's a gorgeous boat. I'm sure it's a lot more modern now. It's air conditioned. And I'll just kind of back up just a little bit on this story because when we went across, there was this one family of Blacks, and they were from here in the US, and one of the gentlemen had married a young lady from, this family was basically all out of Atlanta. I would later learn this by talking to them. So they went to Spain. This is where they were married. Apparently this gentleman was in the military and he met his wife. She was of Spanish descent, and they went to her home country to get married. In their company was this one little boy. He was about 5 or 6 years old, and he might have been younger, but he was awful going over. He was screaming and he was hollering, just totally out of control. And to give you a visual of what he looked like, I would think he looked like Rodney Allen Rippey, the little boy that was a little actor years ago. I wanted to get up and just drag him off the boat at one point because he was so uncomfortable. And his mother, they passed him from one woman to the next, and gentlemen, no one could control this little joker. But after we were returning back hours later back to Spain, the captain on this boat, he was a Black British, because the boat is owned by, it's a British boat that takes you across. And he was hurrying everyone up, please hurry, 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 because there was rough waters to get back to the Rock of Gibraltar. And it was, the minute we left the harbor, the boat began to rock and it began to reel, and they lost an engine halfway across the Strait of Gibraltar. Lost an engine. You could hear the railings on the boat were rattling. And the boat had probably 200 people on it. And I sat there next to my wife in this nice, relaxed seat, air conditioned, and this one family of Blacks. And the total of us probably was 9 of us on the boat. And this is where something, maybe the Cobra helped me that afternoon, going back that evening. We saw people, I pointed out to my wife, I said, look what's going on. Out of the maybe 200 people on the boat, on both levels, probably half the people had their vomit bags up. They were throwing up. they were they were screaming and hollering this, and never once did I feel afraid. Not once did I feel a sense of imminent death. I didn't feel that way. And I looked around and I saw this little boy. That's what really woke me up to what was going on. That little joker was lying on his mother's breast. He never flinched. The same little boy that had everyone, including myself, to throw him overboard. He showed no fear, no. And when we finally got across the harbor and the boat rattled in, the engine was sputtering, and we were leaving the boat, and you could smell the vomit from people that had thrown up on the stairways and so forth. Those of us, and talking to the gentleman, one of them, the brother-in-law, the man who got married, this was their first trip to Africa as well. And what did I learn from that as I relate to the Cobra? I had seen my mother, the mother of humanity, the mother of mankind. And you know, when you go to see your mother, sometimes they can just make things right. No matter how bad the storm, no matter how turbulent life can be, not one of these people, including my wife and I, showed any sign of stress. And when I walked off the boat, I felt stronger. When I walked away from the Cobra earlier that morning, that day, I felt stronger. It is in the struggles that we endure, that's when we can truly walk straight up. You know, it's not arrogance, it's just knowing you've dealt with the real force of death, the real forces of trouble. It was just a storm that we went across. But that little boy probably embodied more about that trip to Morocco than anything. That, yeah, it's tough going across. It could be an easy ride, but it may be tough mentally. There was nothing hard about making my mind up to go to Tanzania. But the roughness was in my own mind. And maybe it was the vibration from the boat that had him shook up. Maybe it was the fact that he was going where he'd never gone before. But once he arrived there, it was nothing. So that's the best way I can answer that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you
Are
for
the
your story. That was awesome.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Susan. Have you thought with your voice and your soothing words of having this book on, you know, it used to be book on tape, book on CD, with, you know, you're driving in the car, you're in bed in the evening, or you're just doing something and you want to listen to it, working on the computer. Yeah, the audibles.
No, I hadn't. To be honest with you, it's never crossed my mind. But
you could do that with your book, and you could also do that with other people's as well, because of
I agree.
your voice is a product.
Well, I'm
Absolutely. I'm going to add my 2 cents and say she's right on the mark.
thank you. It is certainly something that I will call upon the talents within this ATS.
Yeah,
to
Grace
assist me in, yes.
with Antonio, Deanna.
Will do, will do.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll share something, Vastim,
Sure,
and with
please.
you and the whole group. Yesterday was such an upsetting day for me personally with all that's on the news that's been happening. And my spirit was just off last night, and you may have heard me on your answering machine because my phone wasn't acting up. I had the need to hear your voice. There's something about your voice is very soothing to me. And I told Tony, I'm calling Vastim, it's his birthday. I said happy birthday on this class, but I need to hear his voice because I can't go to sleep I'm too wound up. I need to hear his voice. And so I called your phone, and sorry, my phone decided to act up. And when I went to try and disconnect, because I got your answering machine, it wouldn't, my phone didn't hang
Well,
up. So I apologize, but
oh,
it's,
no apology.
it
Oh,
adds to
no.
the point that what everybody's saying, you have a very unique voice, and that is very suitable to being a real force on audibles. So you really do need to listen to Susan and follow her guidance.
I will. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to talk about, this is amazing because I'm not that savvy when it comes to the electronics. This Android phone I have, I even sent Phil words of yeah, basically forgive me, because I just discovered, to be honest with you, this morning, I just discovered with this phone how to retrieve voicemails. That's how bubblehead I am. And that's when I discovered, just maybe an hour before, when I discovered your text, your voice message, Pamela. I didn't know I had to slide something over in order to get to what it called. I didn't know that. But thank you. I listened to your message a couple of times, and that's when I discovered Phil had left messages, and I didn't know. But now I know how to use it properly, and just another Cobra in my life, just another Cobra, just another bull that came into the arena and later to be carried away, carried by mules. Yeah, but I'm having fun with this because I'm living my dream. I'm experiencing the real beauty of getting older, if not wiser, but just have a deeper understanding. And we're all the people suffering or dealing with the same crazy issues in life. It's the same thing for everyone. And when I think about the bull, when I think about the Cobra, it's amazing, just minutes apart, if you went by plane. There was a facility in Malaga, Spain. There was a Black Hawk helicopter. There was a beautifully guarded facility, beautifully guarded. And I learned from one of the tour guides I had in Spain, the land of the bulls. And when you're riding around Spain, you see these statues of bulls, images of bulls all over the place, these giant black bulls. And there's a story behind these bulls. But this one facility that I saw, it was a facility that had a carbon copy across the Mediterranean outside of Tangier. And this, I understand, is a facility that was planted all over the world in various countries, where King Fahd, who was at that time the king of Saudi Arabia, he had at his disposal every means of protection and health care in every country that he claimed as a vacation home. And I'm saying that to say this. I was awakened to see by this and to tell this story, that the immense wealth that King Fahd possessed, I learned that he had a favorite grandson. They would leave Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and they would go to London because King Fahd loved chocolates. He would fly in his 747 along with his staff. His favorite grandson would later follow him riding on an L1011, just for he and his young friends. They possessed this much wealth. His favorite grandson would go to London simply to buy toys for himself and his friends. But again, he had all these medical facilities scattered around the world. And when he died, when he died, it made the national news. It was global. They wrapped him in a rug. They took him out into the desert, his grandsons. They dug a hole and they put him in the sand. That was the extent of what he left behind physically. Wrapped in a rug, put in the sand, no headstone, and they walked away. So what did that tell me in this book, Awakened by the Ants? That we can clamor, we can die, we can fight for many things. And I'm sure he died with honor. And perhaps this was his way of showing how honorable he was, King Fahd. And that all the implements and all the utilities in this life are simply to make life comfortable. And if I'm comfortable, hopefully I'll be happy with myself, because you can't take it with you. You can only leave behind the good you do for people and the services that we render. That's it. Wrapped in a rug, buried in sand. But he left behind in every country his own mini hospital that couldn't do anything for him when time said, come home. That's just part of this Awakened by the Ants, to tell this story so that we can stop fighting and destroying each other for things we have no control over. We're just leasing this place. We're all tenants. We don't own anything. Time is what it is. This is what the ants, and we talked last week, Susan and I, she said she had an ant farm when she was growing up. If there's anything I've learned from nature through the ants, it is the good that we do for each other. That you don't take anything with you. None of it. Only the services to each other. Is there another question or thoughts? This chapter, the bull and the cobra.
I'm still on what Miss Susan and Miss Pam said. Yes, your voice is so soothing. And Monica, she put it in the chat. She said, yeah, I was telling that to Grace yesterday. And she did. She probably sent me a chat. Oh, his voice is so calming. I love it. You know, so
Thank
yes,
you.
If you would do audible books, would be amazing. Yes.
Well, with you all's help, I know I can do it. The great coaching that's available here, and thank you, Susan, Pamela, and Monica. Is it who was the last name you just mentioned?
Monica.
Monica.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you,
Yes.
ladies, and I'm blown away. Thank you very much. When I woke up this morning, I was doing carpentry work. I had to repair my fence because last night we had some pretty violent winds here in the Houston area, my side of town. And this has nothing to do with this book, nothing whatsoever, but it's in alignment with just life and dealing with the issues, because I had no idea I'd be using a hammer this morning. That's how uncertain life is. I haven't used my hammer in such a long time. It's actually rusty, but I had to get it out this morning just to repair a fence that the unseen wind, which in a sense was my Cobra all over again. We have to constantly deal with them and realize that it has its bite, it has its sting, but we have ours is called just faith, inner strength. Anyone else? I have a question I'd like to ask. Is there anyone that perhaps have envisioned anything that perhaps I can introduce into another book of mine down the road someday? Something that this story reminds you of something that you had to deal with, that frightened you. What did you learn from some element in nature. What did you learn? What have we learned?
Mr. Vastim, can you go a little deeper in your question?
Yes, have you witnessed anything in observing something in nature? Have you heard wild geese flying over your house in the dark at 3 a.m.? Have you ever heard the sound they make when they're flying? Have you ever thought about what are they looking at when they are flying in the dark? Where are they headed? Maybe you're not in that part of the country or the world where you experience such a wonderful, marvelous sound. We used to have a lot of them fly over the Houston area, but because they have changed the geography so much with human habitat, a lot of the natural wonders of natural waters don't exist anymore, the lakes and swamps where the geese would go. But have you ever watched maybe a bird or a horse or whatever that gave you some insight as to how powerful and unique we are as human beings by watching nature?
I've, you know how you see the documentaries on the lions, if you look at Discovery Channel and how they live and how they
Mm-hmm.
eat. And because Antonio talks about it a lot, saying that the lion didn't kill to save for the next day or save for a rainy day. No, they they do what they do for that day, and they are focused just on that day, on what needs to be done that day. And so that's what I get from, you know, when I see the lion and what they're doing and how they go about to get their prey. And it's just, you know, it's kind of amazing to witness. You know, of course they're trying not to, you know, they want to do the surprise attack so they can get them a lot easier. But you know, when you have a group of zebras or a group of gazelles in a group, somebody is going to see, and when one starts running, they all start running. So
Mm-hmm.
of course the lion has to go in, but the lion isn't focused on the whole group. The lion is laser focused on the one that they said, okay, this is the one for today, and
Mm-hmm.
they go after it and don't stop until they get it. So you can learn a lot from lion.
Because you would discover later in the book, they talk about the lions, they talk about them. And what was amazing, and I'll kind of like give a little clue as to why I'm saying what I'm saying. Around drinking a nice dinner one night when I was on the safari, in that area where you see the tent behind me, a question came up from one of the people I was traveling with. They complimented the lion because I saw the real violence of them one day, and this television doesn't do it justice when you absolutely see how powerful and how violent they really are. One lion, I'll give you an example. The female had killed a wildebeest, or at least brought it down, it rendered it helpless. And the male lion came along later to finish it off. Because absolutely, the male lion is very lazy from when you listen to the guides, because his whole purpose is to regenerate and to protect. But basically, most animals that are killed by the females. Often the male will, if he finds an animal that's a little weak, because he's slow, he's so large. But what I learned that night by listening to these men who live amongst these animals, make their living watching them, not one of them gave words of praise to the lion other than his power, he's so majestic. But the lion has a very delicate stomach. He can't digest anything that's more than 2 days old. He'll get sick. So what each of these men said, sitting around that night drinking scotch and whatever, the animal that is actually superior on the plains is a hyena. The hyena is not known to get sick from eating anything. He can eat something that's been dead for 2 months. It won't make him sick. He's almost immune to disease. He's almost immune to all those things that are detrimental to everything else. But what separates the lion from the hyena is that the lion has an absolute sense of where he is. You know, the word infanticide. The average lion, the reason why they're so protective and so, because they only exist for about 3 or 4 years and they're finished. They run in groups, brothers. They're never friends, rarely. But they only last about 3 years in a pride. And after that, they're wiped out or they run off because a younger bunch always come along and take over. And the word infanticide takes place when, when the lion pride is overtaken by another set of lions, male lions. They kill off all the male pups. They get rid of them. They destroy them, eat them, or they just wipe them out. So I think a lot of people have used the lion much in history because of his power, his sense of ruleship. That's what makes him so unique amongst all the big cats. And this is my own observation. I haven't gone to a lot of circuses or even a lot of zoos, but you find very few panthers or leopards in zoos. The two big cats, the lion and the tiger, I'm amazed that with all their power, they have them in circuses all over the world, walking on big balls. They have them in circuses jumping through hoops of fire, but you don't see that many leopards. The leopard is more solitary. He's very stealthy. He's not as powerful as the lion, but the lion is revered and respected by everything because he is so powerful in his 3 years or 4 years of dominance. So what is the lesson we learn is that as human beings, relish and respect the power that you have because it is not everlasting. If that's anything that I would learn from watching the lion, is that rule well while you have it. If it just doesn't last that long because there's always another lion that's ready to take you down. And protect what you leave behind as far as your offspring, because he's going to, the next lion is going to destroy everything you've built. That is his purpose. That's what I've learned from nature, that no matter how much we build, you know, you may fight to get it, but you have to fight to keep it. And that's what I've learned from nature when I think about the lion. Is there anyone else that'd like to chime in? But I just wanted to off track just one time because I just wanted to express through this chapter the beauty of watching nature, learning from it. Learning from it. Yes.
Yeah, for Vastim, for me, when you said horses, I used to ride a lot. And when I first started riding, my trainer started me Western saddle. And then I did English saddle and I did jumping. And then one day he said to me, but Pam, he says, now, and I got good at it. He says, now you will learn to really ride a horse. I didn't know what he was talking about because I practiced and I did well. And he brought out a horse and had no saddle. And he said, now you will learn how to ride a horse. And he said, get on. And I was like, okay, nothing to put my foot in, and I have to figure. And he said, get on the horse. And I had to stand there a minute and look at this animal and go, how do I get on this horse? I've ridden my whole life, I mean, for years now. And I learned about having to become one with the horse. First, before you could ever mount it, you had to become one. I had to come and stroke it. I had to talk to it. I had to breathe it. And that then once I had to take my hands and rub it over his entire body. I had to feel the muscles. And once I did that, then I could feel I was becoming one with it. And then I was able to mount it. And once I got on it and began riding bareback, I realized I was now riding for the first time in my life, because the horse wasn't going where I wanted to go because there was a bit in its mouth and I was turning it and that way. But it knew, it had a sense of who I was, and I knew who it was. And it knew when I wanted, it could feel me squeeze it. It could feel my legs against its flesh. It could feel my hands against its neck and know where I wanted to go. And through touch, through body to body touch, I learned how to ride. And that for me was a life-altering experience. So
Awesome. One with the horse, one. And what amazing method this would be, as those of us who lead, those of us who use our gifts to become one with the people who listen to us, to become one with those that are suffering, to become one with those that, because as I wanted to illustrate, and you made it so perfectly clear, that once you became one with the horse, because they're so sensitive, you know, a horse, he has almost, the use of his eyesight is almost 300. He can see so well. They don't even have to turn their head. And their ears follow every sound. Their ears are constantly moving. And he heard you. He smelled you. He felt your touch. And so it is when people feel us and they can know that we're there for them and we're not there simply to abuse them. We can go a long way with that. That's a powerful message you learned. Even when I think about Morocco, the men who are the real horsemen in Morocco, they don't have bits in their horse's mouth. They have a rein system that simply is like this microphone system around my neck. It just drapes around their neck because the rider and the horse are one. If he leans to a certain side, the horse knows he has to go. And that's powerful, Pamela. Thank you very much. Thank you. Does anyone ever remember looking at Roy Roger? Did Trigger have a bit in his mouth?
See, Miss Pam is thinking.
I don't think I ever saw Roy Roger ever ride up to a tree and tether his horse. I don't think he ever tethered Trigger, did he? He and Trigger was one. They were such, because the times I used to help get a horse ready for riding, and I look at the bit that goes into his mouth. It's a horrible thing. You know, from the outside, it doesn't seem, it's painful what we put the animal through. You're pushing metal against the top of his mouth. He's really responding to pain. But a horse, the best trained horses don't use a bit in their mouth. They don't use it. I just wanted to ask that question. I didn't know the horses were going to come up in this, but chapter 3, the bull and the cobra. I learned from both of those. I learned that when you come out of the chute strong, You got to go back through the chute. You'll either go back through it victor or loser. And I learned from the bullfight that if you are the matador, you have to stand your ground properly. Because I did see one matador was booed out of the arena. Why? It's because he didn't kill his bull cleanly. He ran his sword three times into the neck of the bull, and he was booed out of the arena. So what did I learn from that? Is that even though you may be the victor, but if you didn't do it right to become a victor, the world is watching. But the matadors who stood firmly and drove his sword at the neck of the bull, the top of his neck, properly, and the bull dropped instantly, was rewarded by that beautiful lady up in the stand, who virtually sat on a throne watching the bull fight. I learned from the Cobra that once you're confronted with it, don't run from it. It will do what it has to do. It's a snake, it's a cobra. That's what I learned. The bull and the cobra. And hopefully that chapter will walk the reader to the next chapter that will inspire, help them ask questions that only they can answer, but above all, get understanding. Are there any other thoughts or questions about this chapter, the bull and the cobra? Well, I see that Sister Grace, I don't see her on my screen. Are you still there, Sister Grace? And I want to thank all of you for your comments, for your questions. This is a great walk. Thank you very much for all of you for taking time out of your Thursday afternoon to listen to me. And behind me again is that little tent where I absolutely came to terms in retrospect of what happened to me that allowed me to be here, to be able to push the agenda for not just for my people, but for all people, to inspire. Because we're all here because of great people who did great things. You know, this medium of communication we're using, great people, great things. We're here because we're blessed by the works of men and women of lion mentalities. And they're no longer here. Many of them are no longer here. But the hyenas are still here because the hyenas are built to take and to steal. But the lion is never meant to be here. It's one forever. So we take over where they fall off. We take over where they die. And that's what makes them so majestic. They're not meant to stay here. It is their image. It is their power. It is their genetics, their DNA that we continue. And I'm happy that each of us are part of the DNA of the lions. I won't be here forever. Don't want to be here forever. But I'll just move on and find my place in the sun. Thank you all very much. So Grace, or you have any other comments, or if anyone has a question, you may have seen the mics unmuted. It's yours now. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else who has any questions for Vastim or any comments? Just want to pour back into him.
Yes, again, to say this was another wonderful explanation of your book, and gaining so much personally from the discussion with everybody on this class and the input. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else? All right. As always, Mr. Vastim, wonderful job. I'm like Miss Pam. I'm looking forward to getting this book when it comes out. And I don't know about anybody else, but when I hear the authors speak about their books or just hear the author speak in general, when I read the book, I can hear their voice when I read. So I'm going to be able to hear your voice, Mr. Vastim.
Well, I hope it'll be loud and clear. Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes, sir. All right, everyone. Well, that will do it for us. Thank you for joining us today. Everyone, have a great day. See you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.